My name is Barbara Cole. I think I know most of you by now. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research Administration, and thank you all for coming. We really, really appreciate it. This is the forum where we really like to get out upcoming news and tell you what's about to transpire or what has transpired. Okay, on the agenda today, some minor and some major items: effects of government shutdown, what Sierra Cedar is doing with Workday, Jackson work order process, some additional changes in the PCRFL effort certification, and some of those we're going to talk about what's coming as well. The research technology assessment, you disclose and conflict of interest changes, best practices for closeout, reading this down, CCS charge rates. You may have some questions about that. Service center policy changes, some clean card activity, and the revised common rule. Okay, effects of the government's shutdown. It's come, it's gone. So you might notice that most of the agencies not affected by the shutdown, the first one was DHHS. These agencies had already had their budget put into place in fall at the beginning of the federal fiscal year. So it was DHHS, DOL, DOD, and the U.S. Department of Education. However, others did not have their budgets done. Science Foundation, we sent out a lot of notices on NSF. They just shut down everything. The NASA, NOAA, USDA, NIST, NEH, and DOE. Okay, so even though the agencies weren't shut down, the Federal Register closed. So if the Federal Register closes, then the 60-day public notice for grant applications was quelled for a while. What DOE did, even though they weren't affected by the shutdown, is they took the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and the Advanced Research Projects Agency, and they canceled all their travel. So that backlogged different proposals and awards they were looking into and site visits and so forth. Now that was a double-edged sword. Technically they weren't impacted by the shutdown, but they closed down anyway. Some of the peer review panels had to be rescheduled, and because travel wasn't available. And NASA, it was affected by the shutdown, furloughed over 180 postdocs. Said, oh, you're not working, we can't pay you. So this was over a 3-week period, and it has some long-term effects. All we're asking is that you let us know if something is still impacting you from the shutdown. We haven't seen anything else, but you may hear of something, or something may come to you and say, well, this is impacted by the shutdown. So we want to know. And hopefully there won't be another one in the very near future. More close to home, we figured we had about 10 million in proposals. And this isn't just for 1 year, but when you put a proposal through, it's like 3 and 4 years. We had those affected by those agencies that we couldn't submit through. And we were affected by $3.5 million, not quite 4, of drawdowns that were delayed. So that affects the cash position of the university. We did get it, but we just didn't have it as available cash. And all that cash is important because it helps support your payroll. So if it had gone on longer, we might have had more serious issues. Any questions about the shutdown? Okay. So now the other thing, raise your hands if you know Sierra Cedar consultants are in. Okay. Only Central pretty much. So this is, I think, our 3rd set of consultants for Workday. And I actually think we're getting somewhere. This group seems to be very knowledgeable. They are coming in, they're assessing not only just the grants and billing part, but that's the part we're here to talk about today. They're looking at all the aspects of the financial implementation. They're here for a 12-week engagement, and they're not only here to tell us what they think is wrong, they're here to try to help us fix it. So I can give you some examples that, and most of you will say, no kidding. Some of our conversion was done incorrectly based on prior consultant recommendations. So we're going to be going back and retooling some of that. It hurts a little bit for us, and it will impact you somewhat, but we're going to go back and try to do it right to get this thing working correctly. I think that's going to be key. We're hoping in the next few months that we can make a lot of these changes. We're also finding out that, yes, indeed, we're going to find a way to settle the travel cards. You guys know that we've had object classes missing. We've had F&A not charging right, and it seems to be sporadic. Well, it's all about setup. Obligations aren't being liquidated, and we have to do something about budgets and encumbrances so that when you see a balance, it's a correct balance, or at least the more correct balance, reflecting the salaries you've put on and the salaries you've taken off. Once all those things are in gear, then we're talking about reports. That's one of the biggest gripes. I mean, report is not any good if the details aren't good, or if you only have half the details. But I can tell you that I've never been so pleased in the last year and a half as to see Sierra Cedar come in. They've got really knowledgeable people. Last week, I sat through dashboards that they were creating for the administrators in your departments and for the PIs. And I think once you see these, the rollout in these are supposed to be somewhere in the next 2 to 3 months. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And again, they're dashboards. You can drill down into them, but you're going to see things at a glance, and you're going to have something that you've never had before. So cross your fingers. Things are going to get better. You've survived the last year and a half. We expect things to get really good and to see what happens when Workday does what it's supposed to do. Questions there? I really have high hopes on this one. It will help us a lot. This is dashboards are coming. And I've actually seen them. So it's not fake news. Okay. The way we're going to do this is whoever is ending is going to present the next presenters for the next round. Up next are Stu McIntyre and Tatiana Veklantseva. They're going to talk about the Jackson work order process.
So, Jackson work order process. This is kind of a refresher reminder. It should be quite straightforward and quick. We want to give everybody a reminder that when you have a project and you know that Jackson is going to be involved, that you submit the Jackson work order to us as soon as possible. That's either at the proposal stage or at the contracting stage. The sooner you let us know about it, the sooner we can make sure we review the budget and we contact Jackson and we have all of our ducks in a row. If you wait until later on, it is going to cause a delay in initiation at Jackson, which could affect your project. The website has a couple different areas where it specifically lays out the process. I've had lots of conversations with study team members and coordinators where they want clarification, and I'm more than happy to have those conversations. Feel free to call me. You could feel free to call Tatiana when there's specific budgetary items, but a lot of the answers are already there on the website. It lays out what you need to submit and when you need to submit it. Couple screenshots showing it, and when you go into submitting to ORA, it lays out the process. You go into our main website, www.ora.miami.edu. You go to the submitting to ORA where the little blue box is, and you could go down into the industry agreements receiving funds, and it lays out what we need when you're submitting a general contract to us. The PCRFL, Word format of the agreement, the protocol, the scope of work, the informed consent, and the eProst identifier. It also lays down just underneath there that if you are anticipating the use of Jackson, you are to submit the Jackson work order request form to us at that time. Now, the Jackson work order request form has a selection there where you're supposed to be placing the award number and the grant number. If you're submitting this to us at the front end, there is no award set up. So you could leave that blank. we have those request forms submitted in the front end so that it could be assigned properly internally to Tatiana's team and to mine. And then when the main agreement is finalized, we're going to circle back with you when the award account is set up so that we know what the Jackson work order needs to be tied to. So in a nutshell, again, submit it all to us in the front end as soon as you can. There's also in the submitting to ORA a separate section, not just in the awards or the agreement section, that says Jackson Health System, Jackson work order. It pretty much reiterates the same thing. These are the documents that we need when you're submitting the project to us. Okay, there's 2 times that you could submit a Jackson work order request form, pretty much. In the front end, you have an industry clinical trial, you know it's going to involve Jackson, you submit all the documents to us at one time. The PCRFL has a section where you mark if Jackson is anticipated, you mark yes on that, and you give us a Jackson work order request form, okay? The other scenario is when you're often dealing with a federal project and you are now anticipating the use of Jackson. That may be after you're awarded. At that time, you submit the Jackson work order request form, okay? We are continuing working with Jackson on shifting our internal processes for faster routing and for faster processing. There's things that Tatiana and I have been working on internally on speeding up the routing of certain documents. We're going to be working with some departments and we're going to be changing our processes so that we have more documents routed to the department and the PI at one time. If you're familiar, usually what happens now is that we have an agreement and an MCA routed to the PI for signature. Then once the award and the award line is set up, we then route the Jackson work order for signature. What we're working on is doing it all at the same time. So we may not process out the Jackson work order. We cannot process the Jackson work order until the award is set up, but we can get the individual signatures prior to that. So we'll get Jackson's signature because they take, sometimes they're quick, sometimes they take a long time, 2 to 3 weeks to send us a work order back, and that's a delay in the initiation of your project. So if we do it in the front end, we could avoid those delays, hopefully. That's what we're working on. When we're requesting the Jackson work order request form, as the website shows, you also need to provide the Jackson application and the Jackson study calendar. Those are the 3 documents we need when you're submitting a project that involves Jackson. Any questions? Yes.
I have a comment, not a question. I was thinking of a stuck project that we have in our queue right now, and it's due to when the package was routed to the HSRO. No one identified that Jackson was involved, and then because of that, they're not able to see the IRB documents, nor is the informed consent going to be drafted appropriately. So please, when you're submitting the ePro submission, make certain that you identify that Jackson is involved.
Yeah, ideally you would be submitting in parallel to the HSRO and to ORA. If you're submitting to the HSRO and you're not marking it as a Jackson study, they don't have access to the project in the ePro system. So when Tatiana's team starts coordinating with the Jackson side, they're not going to see the project and they're not going to give us any input and they're not going to give us their budget until they see the project through the ePro system. There have been some individuals in certain departments who have brought up, well, we don't want to submit it to the IRB until we get the contract done. That's just not going to work, because in order for us to get the contract done, we need to get Jackson's input, and Jackson's not going to give us the input until it's submitted to the IRB with them having the access to view the project. Thoughts, questions? Any other comments? No? Feel free to reach out to Tatiana or myself if there's any confusion on the process. Like I mentioned, I get tons of emails, tons of questions. I'm happy to answer those questions in the front end to point you in the right direction. Or if you think that there's a hiccup or a problem, contact us then. We're happy to help. Yes?
Question on the HSRO, the informed consent submission process. That happens through the clinical coordinator normally, because if not, it would have to be guided through the grant to be able to submit it.
I don't quite follow the question.
For the informed consent form, you're saying that we have to submit it to the HSRO?
Well, you need to submit your project to the HSRO. That includes the protocol and other study relevant documents. This is for the IRB to review your project. One of the things that the IRB does do is review the informed consent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, my question is, don't we have to be listed in the PI's personnel to be able to have access to the people to submit it? Or is that done separately?
Well, you're going to have to talk a little bit more directly to the HSRO on their submission process, but I'd have to defer to how your unit operates. The project is submitted to the HSRO, to the ePro system, and whoever does that answers all the questions that need to be answered, which one of them is including who are all the study personnel that are involved. So that's done during the submission process. That's not something that we really touch, but I've seen it when I look into eProst. But if you have any questions on the specific submission process, it's best to reach out to them. They'll point you in the right direction. Next, we're going to have Jill Tincher. She's going to talk about some changes in the PCRFL.
Good afternoon. I think I know most of you. If not, my name's Jill Tincher. I'm the Executive Director of our pre-award unit. So I'm going to highlight some changes to our proposal contract routing form. As you all know, this is the document that's required whenever you're making a submission to pre-award for us to understand what the study is about and to be able to assign it and work it appropriately. So we've made 4 changes that are going to go into effect on Monday. We're giving you the heads up today. The first one is on page 1. We have added an after the fact button, which is highlighted in yellow above. This is going to be a central office use only, meaning none of you will ever fill out this box. Essentially, what the institution is seeing is there's a growing number of proposals that are being routed to our office after they've been provided to the sponsor. That's not supposed to occur. The authorized office that is allowed to submit proposals is ORA. There are some sponsors that allow the PI to initiate submission. That's okay. But even in those cases, the package has to be routed to ORA first. We have to review it and approve it. And by us approving it, that is us authorizing the PI to then submit. They shouldn't be doing it in the opposite order. But we have noticed it, so we are going to start to track these so that we can do some reporting. We can identify whether there's a way that we can avoid these scenarios, because what we risk is the checks and balances that pre-award does today not occurring. Making certain that we have institutional oversight and institutional approval not occurring. So please partner with your faculty, make certain that they are aware that they shouldn't be submitting until they've routed to us and gotten our approval first and foremost. But we will be tracking these moving forward. On page 2, we have started to address GDPR. That's the General Data Protection Regulation that went into effect May of 2018. Many people think that GDPR is the European version of HIPAA. That's really not true. It is so much broader than what HIPAA is. Bottom line, if ever we are collecting data from EU citizens in any regard, not just clinical trials, it also pertains to when we market the university, when we try to recruit their students and so forth. Whenever we obtain information from an EU citizen, there are requirements that we have to adhere to related to how secure our systems are, who can and cannot access the information, how you utilize the information, and did we get appropriate authorization from the individual before we can use that data. So this is hitting the university from so many different angles, not just the Office of Research Administration, but what it's prompted my contract officers is we first need to know if there's a potential for EU involvement. If we know that there is, then we want to make certain that, one, we're looking at, are we capturing information? Where are we storing that information? How are we securing that information? And then we're also looking at the contractual terms that it pertains to. So on page 2 of the PCRFL, down at the very bottom, we've only done the changes that I've highlighted in yellow. So the first one is we add a question, will human subject data be stored in the cloud, in systems, or on servers owned or housed in the European Union? You have to answer the question yes or no, or your faculty have to answer the question yes or no. You don't always know that answer, and so the questions beneath it kind of help guide you through the process. One, what we've done in all of the pick lists where you were able to identify which country is involved as it relates to research performance locations, subcontracting, and so forth, we've inserted the acronym EU in parentheses next to the country name. That eliminates you having to think about, is this country part of the EU or not? We've done that thinking for you, okay? So when you answer the question, research or performance location, if it's outside of the US, you're gonna select the country and that will denote whether the EU is involved or not. The same thing with, will you be subcontracting to a foreign entity? The same EU pop-up will appear if applicable. And then the last thing that we did was we expanded that final question on page 3. It used to just say, will there be a foreign country involved? And we've expanded it to identify as a vendor, as a consultant, as a service provider, or as a collaborator. We've already covered subcontracting in the question above. So we want you to highlight to us if you know of any of our vendors or contractors being in the EU, because that will make us look into it further. It doesn't necessarily mean that GDPR is applicable. These are just to aid us in assessing whether GDPR may or may not be applicable, okay? We've been working very closely with UM's privacy office. They are really the primary point of contact with GDPR. I'm telling you that just as an FYI. More often than not, you will not engage them. These questions will aid my contract officers in knowing whether or not they need to engage privacy or not, okay? The next is related to intellectual property. This is a change that is now appearing at the top of page 4 on the PCRFL. Previously, there used to be some intellectual property questions, just asking you, do you anticipate IP resulting from this project? Does this project pertain to a PI startup? And questions like that. Right beneath those questions, we have added this certification statement at the request of the Office of Technology Transfer. Dole went through some changes last year, and as a result of that, OTT wanted to add this certification statement to each of our PCRFLs. I'm going to read it aloud just so that you have the context. If this proposal or contract is directly or indirectly funded by a federal agencies, PIs, PDs, and co-PIs agree to assign and hereby do assign to the University of Miami all right, title, and interest in any and all intellectual property developed in whole or in part with federal funding. So this is specific to federal funding or federal flow-through funding. Agree to execute and deliver all documents and do any and all things necessary and proper to effect such assignment, and agree to make timely disclosure to the University of Miami OTT of any intellectual property conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of work under the federal funding. Disclosure to OTT shall occur at least 45 days prior to public disclosure of such intellectual property. So again, this is a certification statement that OTT has asked us to incorporate. PI needs to answer, agree on the PCRFL. It's a required field. If not, we're going to circle back with you. But more importantly, because this is something OTT has asked us to incorporate, if your PI or you have any questions regarding this language or the circumstances of a particular project, you should direct your questions directly there. Keep in mind, the PCRFL has sections that pertain to conflict of interest, pertain to HSRO, and so forth. We are aiding in the process, helping them in the process, but they are still the point of contact related to the specific section. Any questions about those 4 changes? Yes, Julie.
Go back to page 2.
Yep.
GDPR.
Yes.
When you were talking about human subject data resource, are any research and performance locations outside of the U.S., you're talking about if it's run under our PI, not as a group?
We're talking about everything. So there are many cases where UM collects data, and then it is provided to the CRO as an example, and that CRO is housed in the European Union. That is somewhere where we want you to check the box, yes, if you know of it. If you don't know of it, that's okay. We're still going to do our due diligence on our end. There are other cases where we're going to receive data from someone, and it is EU data. Maybe we had a site in the European Union where we enrolled subjects and we gathered data, and that data is going to be collected and then it's going to be provided to the University of Miami. That is one that we want you to flag as well. So there's many different scenarios that may apply here.
So if the sponsor is in the EU and they pick this as a site.
If we're going to store it on their,
We're definitely storing it on their data system outside in the EU. So you would check.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Angel?
What if you're using public data, the Cochrane Library, which is based in England, and we're using that data for research?
If you're using data that was acquired in the EU, you're going to flag it, yes. So
It's public?
yes, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because one of the things that is coming out with GDPR is their interpretation of how secure you, how you keep data secure is very different than the USA standard. And that's one of the things, that's why the team needs to look at the systems and how we're protecting that data and who we're sharing that data with. Okay? Did anyone else have their hands up? Okay, I want to do my own little plug just so that you remember. One, if you don't already, if you aren't already a member of the ORA listserv, the Research Admin listserv, please become a member, because when these changes go live, when we announce things, we always announce it through that listserv. The other thing is always pick the PCRFL directly from our website. Don't save it on your desktop, because when you do that, the second we implement changes like these, you're missing out on those changes. And then I'm gonna prepare you all. We are in the process of also updating the PCRFS. Two primary changes that are going on there. One, people have been commenting across the institution that we don't know how data use is being managed. Should we send data use agreements to privacy? Should we send it to technology transfer? Should we send it to general counsel or ORA or whomever? It is a real tough spot, and so leaders have been sitting down and talking about how we should centralize the management of data use and data transfer agreements. As that gets finalized, we are going to be updating the PCRFS. We are also going to be sending out an announcement through the listserv. So becoming a member of the listserv is paramount. The other thing that we've noticed lately is people are routing to ORA material transfer agreements that involve money. We're buying the materials. That's not a traditional material transfer agreement. A traditional material transfer agreement is a $0 agreement, and those come through us. The moment that you're buying the materials, it becomes a procurement transaction that should not be coming through the Office of Research Administration. That should be going to business services. They're the ones that are authorized to handle procurement transactions. So we are going to be modifying the PCRFS. When you select material transfer agreement, we're going to pop up a reminder that reminds you if it involves dollars, you should be working with business services, not through ORA. Okay? Any questions regarding either of those?
A couple of things I wanted to mention. They aren't on here for a particular reason because they aren't enacted yet, but I wanted to tell you what's coming down the pike. Okay? So there's going to be a revised policy out for CTMS, otherwise known as the VELO system right now. And Barry Grassi has it completed after working with a number of people. And so that basically says, yes, you have to enroll people into VELOS. And I'll stay away from that part. You will notice there is a one-liner in there that talks about regardless of whether you're exempt or not exempt, and almost nothing is exempt, you will have to start doing invoicing in VELOS. Okay? There's a variety of reasons why. We've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years. One of the reasons is because we cannot tell what kind of accounts receivable there is. Right now, you have people doing invoicing for milestones and so forth, and then a check comes in or a wire transfer. And we have no idea from the budget and the expenditure if you're even keeping close. If you remember in the legacy system, we used to set you up as, we put your budget as it was cash. In Workday now, except for those that didn't roll over correctly, what it is we set up your budget as your budget, your PI goes spending away, and it's really hard to determine because we can't see what's billed or outstanding there for cash. Now there's another trick to this for a set of regulations that just came into being under GAAP. And it's basically, we have to describe whether that money received is a prepayment or a payment for services rendered. So all this becomes very important in trying to adhere to the governmental guidelines for what the university now has to do. The controller's office is looking at that. We are impacted by that. But the second part of it is we want to get the billing in there. I'm just giving you a heads up. There's a one-liner in there. There's another group that is looking at how to get procedures out for who's going to be doing it, how it's going to be done. So that is coming down the pike. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that I attended a RAC meeting a couple of weeks ago held by the dean. And we had talked on and off again about this application process where we have a policy out there that you have to get basically 5 items in. It's the budget justification, PCRFL, the scope of work, and the announcement from the agency. And sometimes there's a 6th one, which is any prior approvals, cost sharing, F&A waivers, and so forth. Those have to come in 10 days prior and the science 5 days prior. Or you can send everything 5 days prior. That has not been happening. We don't blame you. It's a combination of a lot of things, but it hasn't been happening. And by looking at the statistics, we constantly track that 90% of all the applications come in within the last 2 days, if not the last day of the submission cycle. You know, that is tenuous at best. Let's say everything's perfect and you have a problem technologically getting it out the door. We know your scientists say, I need that time to write the science. This was all discussed in the Research Advisory Committee. I won't say they agreed 100%, but the dean said, okay, we're going to put this into action over here. We are going to abide by the policy. So what does that mean to you? That means if it's due 10 days to us in advance for the budget justification and so forth, that means your faculty member has to tell you what's going on so you can build it more than 10 days in advance. How many people think that's going to happen? Because I will tell you, the faculty that sat there, and there was one kind of not dissenting vote, but questioning vote, and I'll tell you that in a minute. The faculty that sat there said, oh, no problem. And I said, well, I bet if I ask the administrators at the meeting coming up if that's a problem or not, they'll just not, they won't raise their hand saying, oh yeah, no problem. So there's a push and a pull here. You understand, or maybe you don't, and you can ask questions why we need to see it. Right now, you're right. We are looking at what we can look at, and a lot of times it's not much. Okay, what we are going to do is follow a FIFO method. And we've also talked to the dean about sometimes you gotta say no. Now, that means that we're gonna have to revise the policy a little bit because there are some things like a question was brought up. Barbara, what do we do when we got, you know, very complex ones with multiple subs? Okay, I can understand how multiple subs are a problem. Maybe not the bottom line budget coming in 10 days ahead of time, because you know how much you're going to give your sub. But in actuality of getting the science and everything in, you know, so we're going to have to kind of tweak that policy a little bit. We're going to have to get the dean's approval. He wanted to run by June. I don't think it's going to be by June, to be honest. What we said we were going to do is provide information to your department chair and to you on the faculty members that are not making the policy, and that's going to start fairly soon. So you can kind of really sit down with your faculty and say, you got to do this stuff. It's only fair. Because sooner or later, the lesson learned will be, no, we're not doing it. Now, there's always an out. Yeah, Belinda.
How is that different with the email that's already being sent where the chairman is copied?
Oh, the email already being sent says, oh, we got this and there was no time. How is that different? We say, oh, we got this, we're not submitting it. That's how it's different. You know, will there be exceptions to that? You know, nothing's ever clear cut. I can imagine if this is a once in a lifetime RFA and it doesn't come, you know, 2 or 3 times a year, it would have to go through a process up to the provost or the vice provost to get approved. Okay? They're not going to like it if it comes late. They're increasingly getting upset when I send them F&A waivers and Jill sends them waivers and it's not coming in timely. And a couple of them have said no. So, you know, lesson learned is to be told no. If you've got, as an example, and I'm making this up right now because it's not in stone yet, but I wanted to give you the heads up. If you've got something that can be applied for quarterly and your PI just doesn't get around to it, we understand they're busy, but you're busy too. We're busy. Everybody's busy. So, you know, if they don't get around to it and they send us everything 2 days before, we're going to have the option to say no. And then we'll tell you, good luck next cycle. Okay? So don't ask me a lot of specifics right now because they're not set in stone. I'm just telling you what the dean and the research advisory council told me. I didn't go in actually asking for it. I was kind of surprised.
So obviously sometimes it's the chair that's the problem. Sometimes email isn't really.
I get that. You know, some of the people around the table said, we're the worst ones at this. We send it to you late.
But they all, a lot of times they send the budget and they said, yes, it's final. And you do all the paperwork and you input and you do everything. And you're like, oh, this is great, it's done. And then they go, oh, we're changing things.
Well,
What happens then? I mean, that.
look, maybe you want to talk to this. I don't know, Jill.
So it depends on if and how rigidly the institution wants to enforce the policy. The way that the policy is written today is it says that it's supposed to be routed to us 10/3 or 5 days in full and final format. That means that if they choose to revise those documents, if they submit to us, let's say 5 days in advance, but then a day before the deadline, they revise everything. If you read the words to a T, then they're not honoring the policy. And so that's what we need to look at. How we're going to revise the policy, what exceptions we're going to allow, and still instill the intent behind the policy. Because right now, we have a policy just to have a policy. No one adheres to it. The memo says we submitted it, we just didn't do a thorough review. And because we weren't afforded the time to do a thorough review, if anything comes up that is awry with that application, which does happen all the time, PI and department are accountable because they're the ones that routed it to us outside of the policy. So we've got to figure out how the policy is going to be modified, what the particulars are related to an exception in order to address that.
And this is the closest we've gotten on this. So I do think that with all the changes occurring in the School of Medicine, this one's going to come to fruition. There are gradations of what is considered complete. When I'm looking at it, don't send Jill the PCRF and the budget and not the budget justification, because we're not going to count that as complete. We need all 5 plus the 1 if you're going for waivers or approvals ahead of time. The idea behind this is, first of all, to get rid of the I'm going to treat you special because you're important and come in late. Okay? We've got some departments telling us, you know, the perception is that you guys put, you know, you jump me ahead of somebody else. And, the honest to God truth is, heck yes. And we don't want to do that anymore. First and foremost, we're going to do FIFO fashion.
Well, and that's, I was gonna qualify what you just said, because you said it absolutely correct. There are PIs in departments that honor the policy. And their frustration is, I'm honoring the policy, but I'm not reaping the rewards for doing so. Instead, all of these other applications that come in at the last minute are leapfrogging me. How is that fair? So you said it correctly. They are being treated, other people are being treated favorably for not following the policy. And how is that fair for the individuals that are?
Yeah, literally, we've had people complaining at faculty councils, then you've got a department saying, oh, no, don't do that. I want you to take mine and I want to be the last one in. So we've had both sides. What we have to do is fair, but we're trying to do a couple of things here. We are literally trying to give these proposals the review they should have, okay? I also told the dean, and I expected to get booed out of the room, but I wasn't. Mike Lauer, does anybody know that name? Okay, he's the administrative head at NIH, and he sends out a monthly letter. And Mike has talked in the past about they have done analyses that show, generally speaking, that an application that's sent in early versus late has no bearing on whether or not they get the award. So it isn't that my science got better, it's I spent time to write it. Okay? So the idea is, no, yes, I want to tweak my science, but as you know, we all have deadlines and we have to decide how we're going to fit those in with everything else we're doing. And again, we are here to serve. We are here to help. But at the same time, we also want to be fair to all the fellow PIs. So expect that to come down the road. I really don't see how we can do it by June because it takes a long time to get things cleared up. But I have promised the dean I will get back to him, and he wants some kind of policy out there that's adhered to. And then my whole thing is, guys, don't kill the messenger. We don't like being the bad guys all the time, and we don't like being the ones saying no. And if we're going to say no, by golly, somebody better be behind us.
Right.
Okay? One last thing I wanted to mention before we go on is that where Jill mentioned what we put in the PCRFL about Bidol. So that really only captures a small audience of faculty members, of investigators. And the Office of Technology Transfer, it's incumbent upon them to try to figure out how to go university-wide to have faculty sign off that inventions, while they get a percentage and so forth, IP really does belong to the university while they're employed here. And so that's got to be coming at some point. A lot of universities have done it under HR. It stems from a case at Stanford where they didn't do that, and the PI gave his inventions thinking he had sole authority to do so, gave his inventions away to another company, and it cost millions and millions of dollars. And because it wasn't written in stone that the inventions belonged to the university, the court ruled in the PI's favor, and the university was very unhappy. So we're doing our part to help out tech transfer, but they've got to do something else as well.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, there was one more slide. Julie?
Oh, well, you went backwards then. Are you going to stay there or are you going forward?
Wherever you want me to go. You're in charge, Julie. We're just here as witnesses to,
The next slide, CCS.
yes, that's where I was going next. No. I hadn't discussed it yet. I realized that I jumped it, so I was going to discuss it. What would you like me to do now, Julie? You're in charge.
I was wondering if you could continue.
Oh, thank you, Joaquin. I appreciate the translation.
The conversation started off with Bellows.
Yes.
And then I saw that and I wanted to know, is Bellows falling under that class with the CCS?
No, Velos has nothing to do with CCS.
Okay. And
Go for it. This is the time.
Because Velos is going to track receivables, we're hoping to do that. I wanted to make sure, because building out the calendars is very cumbersome, and who's going to do that?
That's exactly what's being discussed. So what Barbara addressed earlier was originally some folks revamped the policy on subject enrollment. And the rewrite of the policy was UM's old way of writing policies, which was it's really high level and it says something way up here, but it doesn't tell you who is doing what, when, where, and why. So that's what they're working on now. They're trying to figure out who's going to do it, how they're going to do it, whether they're going to do it very high level, whether they're going to do it more granular and stuff like that. We don't know the answer to that. Stay tuned.
So at this moment, you would think that that would only be for receivables.
ORA's motivation is receivables, yes.
And is that going to feed into Workday?
Yes, the integration was built before we even launched Workday. We just haven't spun it live yet because we haven't figured out the Velos piece yet. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to CCS because I overlooked it, my apologies. So last month, the provost put out an announcement. I just have the first paragraph here. But the bottom line is, for years, the Center for Computational Sciences has been providing their services and the university's been absorbing the cost for the most part. They've now finalized a rate sheet. And we are going to now need to follow that rate sheet. Lionel and Ava are going to talk about that in just a little while. So I don't want to take the wind out of their sail. I just want to identify for you on the PCRFL in the budget section, right above where you put the mathematical equations in, we have now added this question. Does the proposal contract anticipate the use of UM's Center for Computational Sciences? If you answer the question yes, a pop-up is going to appear that reminds you that you need to engage their office, you need to identify the services that you are going to need, and you need to get that quote, that estimate, and you need to build it into your study budget as a line item, okay? So I just want to forewarn you, but again, Lionel's going to talk about it at the end of today's session in more depth. Okay? Kelly?
A question for you. You just said get a quote from their office. Is that going to be required as part of the proposal package for ORA?
We're going to be looking for the line item and the dollar amount. We're going to entrust that you worked with them on that dollar amount. But we are going to be looking for the line item. Absolutely. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, I'm now going to introduce Edwin Bemmel. He's our Executive Director, ORA, Post-Award.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Edwin Bemmel. Want to talk a little bit about award closeout and some best practices that we would encourage you to just look at and see how we can implement some of this. So one of the things that, and some of this we've talked about before, but I certainly want to reiterate some of this because I think it's very important. And it's one of the areas that I feel as an institution, some of us are still struggling with making sure that this is all done. So I've said this in other sessions. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, closeout starts, or at least the process of thinking about eventually having to close out the process of a project starts the minute you get the award, right? And you need to make sure that if you actually manage your award properly and do your reconciliations timely, it's going to definitely help you at the closeout process to make sure that this gets done much faster and smoother. From an ORA perspective, we certainly start at least notifying you or through a systematic approach through Workday, 90, then 60, and then 30 days prior to the award expiring. So we have processes in place built in Workday. We did this even before Workday had a small hiatus when we went live to get that reconfigured. But certainly everything is back in place to make sure that looking at when the award expires, and then automatically sending out a notification 90, 60, 30 days to the PI as well as you as the administrators. The notification says something basically to the effect of your award expiring. If you need a no-cost extension, start looking at your award, and if you need a no-cost extension for scientific purposes, by all means, start making sure that that gets requested, or if not, start closing out your project. Basically, I mean, with so many words, that's what it boils down to. Reconciliation is very important. As I said before, it is important to make sure that reconciliations are done regularly. Once a month, you should really reconcile your awards. We're still talking with people that indicate that they don't do their reconciliations regularly and timely. It's extremely important. It helps you identifying issues that you don't want to figure out when you're about to close the award. It helps us to make sure that proper amounts of dollars are billed or drawn down from the sponsor. Proper amounts of dollars are reported to the sponsor if financial reports are needed. So just please make sure that you stay on top of your reconciliation and that this is done every month. Okay, one of the things that we're struggling with is getting final financial or final invoices from your sponsor, from your recipients. I'm sorry. So one thing you could do is, so when we're closing out an award, we quite often hear that, oh geez, we didn't get the invoice from the sub yet. We're waiting for that. Now the invoice is due to our sponsor tomorrow, or the financial report is due tomorrow. We still don't have an invoice. Well, you can help managing this by start notifying the sub. When you start getting your 90, your 60, your 30-day notification, start reaching out to your sub and tell them that, hey, our award is ending. We're not going to do an extension. Start working on winding down the project on your end and make sure that the final invoice is submitted by the date that it is submitted. Keep in mind that most of our subs, we're using the FDP template. It requires that the invoices are submitted 60 days after the award end. So really the sub shouldn't have any excuse, but you can help by start working with them and start reminding them that this is going to be due. Okay. Also, on your end, if you can look just to make sure that as you're getting the invoices from the sub, that those are also reconciled on your end, and mostly just to make sure that when they submit invoices, not only approve them, but just make sure that they get through the process and that they're getting paid. Because one of the things we're struggling with quite often is finding out at a way too late of a moment that invoices to subs have not been paid yet. So you can help by making sure getting it approved is one thing, making sure that it eventually gets paid by accounts payable is very important. That's another thing. Okay, so just please make sure that that gets done. Follow up with AP if needed, because that's another piece that when invoices are submitted to AP, understand it's one of hundreds of invoices that they have to pay. So it's okay to reach out to them, reach out to accounts payable and just ask them, and especially when we're getting to a critical moment where the invoice that we have to submit to the sponsor or the financial report that we have to submit is going to be due. We've built in a lot of validations in Workday. I think that they're starting to pay off from to help better administer awards. A lot of the validations, they're looking at the award line dates, which are basically driven by the type of award that you have and making sure as to up to what point you can actually incur expenditures. So it's looking at all of that and helping making sure that once you've passed that point, that expenditures cannot go through anymore. So that helps us manage awards better, but it certainly needs your end of the game as well to making sure that everything gets done. Okay, and I was just briefly talking about the validations and the line. So understand the difference between your contract date and your award line dates. Anyone that does not know the difference or that has questions on contract dates versus award line dates? Okay. So certainly Workday uses those two different sets of days. And it's very important that you understand what actually, how the one really affects up to when new commitments can be made versus the other one, the award line dates allows you to spend up to that particular date on obligations that have already been made. Another key thing is that as actually by the uniform guidance, but also based on Workday functionality, we cannot bill the sponsor until an expenditure has been settled. Okay, and let me just explain this really quick. So we still at times get people to reach out to us. We have a final invoice due today, and they come and they ask us if, you know, or mention to us that they still have invoices to subs or to suppliers to be paid that they just submitted today to AP. It takes time. So if an invoice is submitted to AP, it's one thing for them to key it in as a payment to the supplier, to the sub, but it doesn't mean that it's going to settle right that same evening. It could sometimes take weeks between AP keying it in. It's based on the payment terms that they have. It sometimes could possibly take weeks between keying it in for payment and actually the expense settling. Settling an expense basically means that the check is cut to them, or the payment, the ACH payment, is now scheduled to be paid that day. So getting a payment settled is what actually drives for us to be able to bill our sponsor. So as long as it's not settled, even if it shows as an expense in Workday, it doesn't mean that it is a billable expense on our end. If it's not a billable expense, we cannot force the system for it then for us to bill the sponsor. So understand that difference and the importance of making sure that all of this is done by the dates that we're giving, so that we can get all the expenditures billed and all the expenditures reported to the sponsor. One of the things that recently, especially, I've seen an uptick on that I really want to bring to all of your attention is reports, final reports that have to go to certain sponsors by the PI, submitted by the PI, and the process that has to be followed by all of us. Specifically, I want to talk about RPPRs and intention statements. And over the last few months, we've seen somewhat of an uptick from different agencies, especially some of the NIH specifically, where they're sending notices to the sponsor, to the PI, copying normally Jill as the contact, saying that RPPRs and or intention statements have not been submitted. They were due months, or in some cases even I've seen a few that were overdue by a year or so, and that they're reminding the PI for their responsibility for making sure that this gets submitted timely, and that not adhering to that requirement could possibly jeopardize not only the PI but the institution. So it's something we need to take very seriously, and I need your help in making sure that this gets done, because at one point NIH can come and say, okay, enough is enough, you've had too many of those and we're going to cut funding for the whole university. We need to take this very seriously. So we do require from ORA's perspective that when we close out a project, as part of the closeout checklist and requirements, that before we actually physically close out the project, that copies of the RPPR and the intention statement are sent to us. We normally have to actually push the final button on the submission, but it is important that the PI gets these out timely, within the 90 or 120 days, depending on which one of the federal sponsors it is. Just make sure that that gets done timely and that we get copies of all of that. Okay, there is a closeout form that has to be submitted by the department to us to make sure that all the steps have been followed in closing out the project. Just go through the form, make sure that all the items are checked off. And if there are questions, certainly we're here to help. We will make sure that we can answer questions if there are any questions related to the closeout. And I think that's it. Any questions on that? If not, Evelyn and Lionel are next. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Evelyn, for coming and taking your time to present.
So I'm Evelyn Cruz. I'm with the Center for Computational Science. So our resources, we offer intellectual hardware and software resources to the university and external partners as well. And we are going to, there are two platforms that the center operates under as far as our services are concerned. High performance computing, which offers you Pegasus. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with Pegasus. And then we have software engineering. And software engineering offers custom software solutions. They aren't typically the shop that you would go to if you just want help with something off the shelf. They are more involved in projects that require specialized scientific software to answer questions to your research. So we do have a mechanism for billing for software engineering services, should you need those as well. So these are the rates that are going to be effective June 1. So these services have always been offered by the center: the software engineering, the big data analytics, the high performance storage, and the advanced computing consulting service. Actually, not the advanced computing, the top three were always built. So we have people on at the university right now that are using those resources and are paying for them. The advanced compute processing, it's what's new, and that's what you're going to be seeing. You're going to have to start paying for those services moving forward.
And quick question, how many of you remember getting an email earlier this year announcing the new fee structure? Okay, a few of you. So, I mean, hopefully you guys paid attention that we're implementing the new fee structure, and you've had some time to relay the message to those researchers that haven't, maybe paid attention to the email so they can start budgeting for these services. As Jill mentioned, we are going to be looking to make sure you work with Evelyn ahead of time and budget for these fees. However, the responsibility ultimately lies with the department and the PI to make sure that they budget accordingly. I can tell you the one thing I can add is I was involved with the construction of these fees and the calculations that go behind it. And these fees, even though, to some extent they're new fees, it's a significant change. The fees are still subsidized heavily. I mean, the cost, if you average in the cost for these services of software, hardware, the center is still subsidizing heavily the research to our PIs.
It might make mention if you could talk about the scope of all the budgets for CCS and how much this is going to bring in when in full swing to show the difference.
Absolutely. I can, sure, I'll give it a try. You can fill in the gaps. You can fill in the gaps. So CCS, it's more than, than these services. CCS, those collaboration. I mean, Evelyn could add to whatever I say. She's the expert. But CCS does collaboration. I know they go out there and do seminars and teaching. And they have a lot of hardware. So their operation is much larger. Their budget is much larger.
So we have some focus areas, and I skipped over the slide a little bit. I apologize. We do focus, we have focus areas: smart cities, big data analytics, precision medicine. We work with Erasmus on climate change and environmental hazards. We do the computational economics, and we have social systems informatics. So we also conduct our own research within the center as well. And then we provide the resources on top of that to expand your scope of work for your research.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, some projects involve CCS so heavily that they really become key personnel of the grant, so they're expensed directly on the grant at that point. So it's not just a fee for service structure that you see now being implemented.
Right.
Any questions?
I think the point I'm trying to get to is, and I'm talking just really round numbers here, where the costs are over $4 million a year to operate the center. What we're really looking at getting back, if once everybody's on board on this, is like 800,000. Okay, so I want you to put that in perspective. Cost is $4 million. trying to get in a little bit back so the subsidy isn't so high. Because I'll tell you a little background about this. It used to be that the medical school subsidized about a quarter of the cost. And then a couple of years ago, the medical school said, I'm not going to do that anymore, charge it out. That's about how it went, you know, and for good reason. I'm not saying that it's for good reason. These are the kinds of charges that should be on grants that are specific for the research. So this rolling mechanism is what we're asking for, and you're probably going to go over that next.
The rolling mechanism?
What I mean is, if you don't, okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't go with that.
Okay, what
I
else
didn't go
is
with that.
next? Where you go?
So we just have, really, we're just going to tell them where they can find the information. We
Okay.
have the rates on the website. We also have, on our website.
Well, let me finish. Okay, sorry. So what I'm getting at is, okay, you put in an application tomorrow, it has CCS charges. You don't get that funded for 9 to 10 months down the road. This starts June 1. What do? Okay? We are prepared to basically charge ourselves for the services. It's an accounting treatment that we do until you are getting funded to do these things. So that's what I mean by a roll-in.
Right.
It's got a long tail to it. It starts with a few people being funded, hopefully, and within about a 3-year period, everybody is funded. So that subsidy we're looking at getting to doesn't occur year 1. It occurs after everybody's on board. What you have to do is your job, is your faculty member's job, is to make sure you get in those requests in the budget. Because if you didn't request it in the budget, then I guarantee you, if you get funded, you're still going to pay for it if it's out of the grant or if it's out of your department. Does that make it easier?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could it be rolled out through IDC?
No,
Why not?
because IDC doesn't cover that. If you know anything about IDC, it's administrative and facilities, right? Like purpose, same purpose, like circumstance. There, you know, if it is allowed to be specifically charged to the grant, then it goes in as a direct cost. That's one of the basics. So it's not IDC. What is IDC and IT is general support and software and pipeline and things like research administration systems. Okay, sorry.
Got it.
Thank you, Robert.
So we have this information on our website. If you go to ccs.miami.edu, you can go to the resources section and you'll see here services. In here, you'll see that you have we can download this fee schedule for UM and non-UM users. And then here you also see that we're also offering grant preparation forms, so you can download NSF and NIH resources page. You can take any pieces that you need, cut and paste them into your facilities and equipment page, and then that'll be a resource to you as well. When you put that in your budget, you also have the hardware that you can put behind it to support that as well. This is my contact information. Our offices are over in the Gables 1 Tower. We have a couple of emails that we're offering you here to contact us with any questions. We are pretty comfortable and used to putting together budgets for resources grants. So just send us an email if you need help. We have our director for high performance computing that can figure out what exactly it is that your project needs and help you put a budget together that's going to help you so that you can complete the research that's in the research plan.
So what amount of time do you need to do that? Because previously, we were talking about how to get budgets in on time and so forth. What are you requesting?
I mean, if we have to get the information to you before 10 days before the proposal is submitted, I'm going to tell you to give me at least a week. We have a small team, the high performance computing team, so you need to give them at least 3 days to turn around and give you. They're going to need some time to schedule to talk to the PI so they can understand what you're going to need, so that they can quote you, give you a quote that's adequate for your research. So definitely, if you're going to submit it to the budget office within 10 days, give yourself another week to reach out to us. Give yourself another 5 days. So that gives us at least 3 days to kind of get in touch with you, give you what you need, and provide you the estimate that you need to include in your proposal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions?
I just have a concern. You're in Gables 1, but you're 243.
I am. We used to be on the medical campus, and then we transferred over about 5 years ago, but we kept our phone numbers. So our whole team is going to have a 243.
And just a quick question, your charges would be a line item under other support?
It would be under other, yeah. So there's a component, there's one of our services here, and I want to point this out really quickly. One of our services, this high performance storage, this is administration. So this is going to be an other expense. But for this purchase, in the description of the service on our website, you will see that you need to buy the hardware to get that. So you're going to have 2 line items. You're going to have to put in a line to buy the hardware, and then we would put in this line as well to support, to install it, to maintain it, and to host it over at the NAP, which is where we have our data center facility. It's downtown Miami. Any other questions? Lionel?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks again. And with that, I'll be presenting myself for for service center policy changes. My name is Lionel Vera, Manager of Cost Analysis and ORA. First and foremost, these changes that you'll see today are pending final approval. They're subject to change, therefore. That being said, this is what you should expect coming. So first of all, no annual deadline for rate submission. I see no smiles. I was expecting to see a few smiles. Maybe be good news for some. Before there's a guideline that from the NIH, the federal government, that we need to review rates every so often. So UN policies to review it annually. That's why we had a deadline, an annual deadline in our former or still current service center policy for service centers to submit by March 30th of every year rate submissions or rate calculations for the upcoming year. We found that service centers often kept their rates from year to year, or they changed their rates at any point throughout the year. So having a deadline on March 30th often didn't make sense. So what we would do is chase after service centers for response by March 30th, and we will technically be we will be working on the rates way past March 30th. But we would technically be not abiding by policy when all in the meantime we'll be charging rates that have been approved prior and were at cost or below cost, so they were therefore compliant. So our new policy now is that you have to submit rates prior to making any changes in rates, and that stayed from the previous policy. Now the annual review of service centers is required. ORA will continue to do that behind the scenes, and when we deem necessary for service centers to submit new calculations, we'll contact the service centers, and at that point, that's the second instance where service centers are required to submit new rate calculations. So you have those 2 instances when you have to get approval. It's not really tied to a date per se anymore. Now notice the emphasis on the word approval. That's because we might get rate calculations that are far from being compliant and adequate. So the onus is really on the service centers to submit rate calculations that are ready to be approved and be compliant. Now for the policy also includes a deadline, an actual date for service centers that are planning on implementing new rates at the start of the fiscal year, and that's April 30th. That being said, for whatever reason we don't get rate approvals by then, the rates cannot be implemented until we have ORA approval. This is still only applicable to service centers that meet the billing thresholds of $50,000 federal revenue in a year or $75,000 total revenue. That being said, all service centers are required to have rate calculations whenever they bill federal grants, and we definitely encourage you to use ORA as a resource to calculate those rates. The consequences for not abiding to the policy as mentioned. And by the way, you may have noticed that, previously we didn't really have any real consequences stated for not abiding to the deadlines and the policy. As a result of a recent service center audit and consequent to recommendations from our Office of, I think they're called Audit and Internal Services, or Advisory Services, we now have an escalation policy. The escalation would be to ORA's AVP, that's Barbara Cole, who you're very familiar with, the Service Centers Department Chair or Institute or Center Director, and a copy to the Core Advisory Committee, which for those of you not familiar, Core Advisory Committee, it's a group of faculty and administrators at the university representing all three campuses. They're under the vice provost for research, ultimately the provost, and they oversee the operations of service centers. They really have the authority, and they say to reduce scope, increase scope, support, or sunset service centers that they deem will benefit the research community. So for not abiding to the policy, the service center will be escalated to those individuals I mentioned 1 month. Actually, upon not being compliant, immediately the escalation would occur. After 1 month of being escalated, if the service center is still not in compliance, then the ISP in Workday will be deactivated with the intention of not allowing the service center to bill grants or anyone for that matter until they are in compliance, until they receive ORA approval for the rates. And the purpose of that is to try to prevent billings of rates that might overcharge or are otherwise in non-compliance. What's the right word? A few other changes. Before in our policy, we had that industry external users could be charged additional premiums. Now we've clarified that that's also applicable to any external non-industry entities as well, such as foundations, other universities. Quick example, let's say your internal rate's $100 an hour, let's say market rate, and what you would negotiate with external users $200 an hour. You can charge up to $200 an hour to any external user, whether it's another university, a foundation, not only to industry users.
Just
Yes.
federal.
Even if, because at one point it was like, yeah, other institutions had academic institutions all had to be the same. That's not the case anymore?
Exactly, yeah. So before we would say if your internal rate is $100, the most you can charge another academic institution would be $100 plus the FNA rate, $153. And we always said, to industry you could charge more, up to let's say the $200. That's the fair market value, what they're willing to give you, and you can negotiate. Now we're saying it's okay to charge up to that $200 to other academic institutions as well.
I want to make a point there. It's usually a PI courtesy that you don't. Especially if you're in a city or a town where you swap rates and use other people's machines and so forth. It's technically allowable, and if you can get it, fine, but most faculty don't want to do that with sister institutions.
Equipment depreciation. At some point in the past, we were able to include those in our rate calculations and try to recover those via the billing rates. That's no longer allowed, except for a few centers that we would identify as specialized service facilities, or identifies the service centers that are specialized service facilities. So you don't have to worry about much about if you are or not. We will contact you and let you know you are, but those are rare. And the last change that we wanted to highlight to it is that what used to be plant accounts are no longer relevant. They're no longer needed. Plant accounts, the equivalent in work, they would be a project driver work tag. But those were used in case we ever needed to record the depreciation expense in a service center account. We needed an offset account for the credit. We used, the plant accounts there to record the credits and accumulate credits there. The other mechanism we used it for is that service center accounts in FRS days used to be in unrestricted accounts, and because as as an institution would clear the balances at the end of the year, and service centers, if you have a surplus, you cannot commingle it with departmental funds. You have to keep them aside. So we use plant accounts to sort of transfer in or transfer out of the service center accounts into the plant account any surplus funds from the service centers. Do the year-end closing. Oops, keep hitting this. Do the year-end closing and then transfer those funds back into the service center account. So sort of bypass the year-end closeout of the institution. Now service center accounts or driver work tax are in designated funds. So any funds that are there roll over automatically to the next fiscal year. So bottom line is what used to be plant accounts are no longer needed for service centers.
I might want to mention a couple other things. The reason you might say, hey, why am I not allowed to do depreciation anymore? It's because the university found it advisable and to bring back more money for ourselves if we used it in our F&A depreciation. So that's why we don't depreciate, because hardly anybody did it, and we could take that depreciation because it wasn't purchased with federal funds, and we use it toward the rate. So that's why that's not done. The other thing I wanted to mention is, Lionel is talking about compliance. If we find out you're charging rates you're not supposed to be charging, if you changed rates and so forth, you're going to hear between Lionel and probably Alan, and we're having this theme on compliance. It's on internal controls. Jill's got it, Edwin's got it. We are being reviewed. We are being scrutinized. Part of this came out of an internal audit review. We have got to have better internal controls and compliance all the way from central down through the department. So you're going to hear a couple other things today that talk about internal controls, making deadlines, and adhering to deadlines. Because if we don't start doing that, we're going to run the risk of not having clean A133 audits. And when you don't have A133 audits that are clean, then it affects your ability for subs. And then you start saying, I've got a problem. And we don't want to be known on the list out there as having a dirty audit. And that's real possible here. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. A side note related to that is, please, a reminder, make sure that, for those service centers here in the audience, when you invoice a grant or anyone, please clearly label the service, the rate per unit, and the number of units that you're charging, so we can easily reconcile it back to the rate sheet we have on file. So we don't think you're charging something you shouldn't be. It just makes it easier for everyone, including auditors. Any questions? And with that, I present to you Lydia Santud, who's our Manager of Business Operations. She's not only a wonderful person, she's a great resource for service centers, a Clean Card program that you'll see. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lydia Santud. Most of you know me, even though not everybody. Some of you might have heard of the Clean Card program already, and some of you it's going to be brand new. If you have a clinical trial, it's a new way the university is working on paying your participants. And the nice part about it is it's a debit card. It looks just like this, by the way. It's reloadable, and ORA manages that program, and you access it just like Workday through your CAN ID. And we are in the process of negotiating right now the final contract. We have been running a pilot for almost 2 years. We're negotiating the final contract. Some of you had card costs and other fees from me. That's what we're currently paying. with the program going into full mode, the costs are going to be different. I do not know that this is what it's going to be for real, but that's what the company is proposing to us, and we are negotiating. But there is a cost for the blank card, and every time you put money onto the card, there is another cost. And the nice part is if you have a participant coming for different visits, they come 10 times, you only pay the card fee. The card cost is only the first time. They can reload that card and they can use it. So the purpose of this slide is to make sure you know, if you know ahead of time, you're going to have a study that's going to use the clean card. If you can budget it into your study, that would make things a little bit easier on your side. And the nice part for the participant that they really love is the minute you click load on that card, they walk out of there, the money is available to use. And it's absolutely free for them to use. They go to Publix and swipe it, or they can even get cash back if they get a pin on it. Or if they want to go to a bank, they can even cash it out if they don't want to spend it that way. So, and the other fees, we haven't really come across this, but if they get $45 on that card and they sit on it, they decide they don't want to use it, they do take money from the balance after 6 months. And then ORA, Lionel and me, but mostly me, he's my backup. We manage that, we set up the studies online, and we set up who can load the cards, who can approve if you need an approver. But right now, ORA is the only person, the only group that can actually void a payment if you load the wrong amount, which that happens so rarely. I think only had one void payment in the last 6 months. So people are careful, but I will be the one voiding. And then we get all types of reporting, some automated, some none. And at the site, which is where you will be, there are basically 2 roles. The coordinator, that will be the one dealing with the patient, handing the cards out, loading them. And a lot of the times that same person is who gets to view some reports. And then any other fancier reports, I provide them. And then, like everything else we got to deal in this world, there's a nice form if you want to participate. And you write to me or call me, and I send you the form to register your study. And the form has all kinds of fields, but this is what we need to register your study on the portal. Every information is there. It was going to be online. And then that's it. If you're interested, you contact me or Lionel. Yes, questions?
Does the coordinator set up the PIN number for when they want to?
No, if they want a PIN number, they have to actually call MasterCard and provide the number of the card. Nobody.
They set that up.
Yeah, we do not have access to the actual debit card number. Only the patient will have access to that. So they get to call MasterCard and say, I need a PIN number. Yes.
So the non-use fee after 6 months, what percentage is that? Does that come out of the patient side or our side?
No, it comes out of the patient side. If they have, say, $50 on their card and after 6 months they haven't used it, each month after 6 months, $4.50 is taken out.
So we need to include that sort of language in the consent form.
Is that where that will go? I think we have a site that uses them. They prepare a flyer to hand out to each participant. This is your part of the process. This is how you can use it. That's for free. If you don't use it after 6 months, they charge you that much. So they do have a handout, and I use them as an example, and I created a handout for when this program goes live. You have something to hand out with the card to say, this is what's happening on your end. Very soon. I know it's this fiscal year. I cannot give you an exact date, but the contract is in final negotiation, so I know it's soon.
So you'll send out listserv?
I will send out a list, and if you want, we're gonna send out a listserv announcement. And there are people who get several emails from listserv. They tend to overlook it. I'm also keeping a private mailing list. So write me, I'll add you to my own list, independent of listserv. It will be in addition, so you get notified twice.
So if you're doing high volume, this is something that might be really enticing to you. We have some studies that, only give out $10 a subject. It's not going to be enticing to them. Those people are still going to have to deal with petty cash. And the other thing that I want to mention is in the pilot, what we've had to do is set up just a standalone computer to be able to do this because of security reasons. One of the things that we've gotten past now is the university and Greenfire, the parent company, have developed and there's going to be a single sign-on. So you'll no longer have to have a separate computer for this, and that was one of the major obstacles. So now we have to get past where we're going to be on the pricing, and we think we'll be ready to roll.
And how much time does it take for the coordinator to do this activity of tracking and scheduling? And if the patient changes their appointment, do you have to set up a reschedule? So how much time and effort should we allocate in our budgets?
I don't know too much about what they do with the coordinating and scheduling. You can use the card, you can use the portal to schedule an appointment with the patient and keep tabs, but every study I have in my pilot is not using that feature. They just keep their appointments the same way they usually do, and then they just use the clean card to load it and hand us payment.
Wouldn't it be great if we could tie this into bellows? Just saying. Sorry.
Alan might talk about that next.
Yeah, but I do have a study on my list of the studies to contact when this goes live. They have a full-time person doing nothing every day. They have so many studies, but process reimbursements. They're all excited about getting on this because that person now can be reassigned to other work. It's a real time saver. All right. Oh yeah, this is Alan Mora, the famous Alan Mora, who is the Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives.
So not getting into that question about Velos yet, but in a moment I will probably touch base on that. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Alan Mora. So wanted to touch base on effort certification. Barbara already mentioned compliance, compliance, compliance. It's been a hot button topic for us at the Office of Research Administration. But we wanted to start off by saying thank you. Effective 12/31/17, I'm sorry, 12/31/2018, sorry, that was a typo there with the year, we closed the legacy eCert system. So that is the system that had all payroll through 8/31/2017, and that's where my mind was when we put up that date. So that is the payroll that was 15, 16 months old at that point. That's what it took for us to get that system closed. We know that it was a tremendous effort by you folks to go after the faculty, technicians, whomever it was that was being paid on grants to get them to certify their effort, and we truly appreciate that. That being said, we are now already open in our next effort certification period, our project confirmation period. It opened on Friday, and those statements are due no later than April 19th. We are going to be making this a point of emphasis. We are being reviewed, we are being looked at in terms of how we are doing in terms of effort certification. This is a point of emphasis for us, and we cannot allow effort statement to stay on as long as they have. So you will be getting additional notifications to those that you've received in the past. We will be sending you emails if you are effort coordinators. We will be sending your faculty emails as both certifiers and as statement owners for projects. So if they are a PI on a grant, they will receive two types of statements that they have to certify. So effective 9/1/2017, when Workday went live, we switched to the hybrid model. What we're doing there is all faculty still have to certify 100% of their effort. Okay, so regardless of whether they are the PI or not, or on someone else's grant, each faculty member, if they are paid in some part on a grant, they will have to certify 100% of their effort statement for the period. If you are a faculty member that is also a PI on a project, you will have to certify or confirm the salary charged for that project for all non-faculty effort. So you would actually have two statements to certify in that period, your own as well as the non-faculty effort. So that's something to be mindful of. We are going to be sending the faculty additional emails. We'll be sending the effort coordinators emails, and we are going to be sending out the departmental chairs an email giving them a summary status of where they are, not only in this current certification period, but because this is our third period that's open, we're going to be sending them a summary statement of where they are with the other periods that are open to date. Now, hopefully, the first two periods, the first one being from September 1, 2017 through November 30th, 2017, and the second one from December 1, 2017 through May 31, 2018. Hopefully those two are already certified and closed and everything's fine on them. But if not, we will include the status of those as well. And this period that's open right now, it is for June 1, 2018 through November 30th, 2018. We unfortunately had to open it up a little bit late. There were some issues that we had to reconcile with the effort certification system, with the data coming out of Workday, and we wanted to make sure that things were correct. You were able to certify, proxies were able to be set up and certified as well before we opened up the system. Okay, so this is the current period that's open, and again, it's due April 19th. As I said, this is our goal. We are going to ask that we are timely on these. And I'll give you just a cautionary tale. We have seen at other institutions, because we've actually gone out and listened to other institutions, we've spoken with our peer institutions, and there are other places where if a grant, if a certification is not done timely, the office will transfer all charges from grants onto a departmental fund at the end of the certification period. So on April 20th, whatever's not certified, they'll take all those funds and move them right over to a departmental program, and then will not allow it to go back to a grant. I think that would quickly get our faculty members' attention. I think that would quickly get our chairs' attention, and while we're not at anywhere near a point where we're going to do that nor advocate for that, it is what other institutions are already doing. So we want to make sure that this is a point of emphasis for us.
Just to make that clear, we're not doing that. Yeah.
No.
I just wanted to mention a couple other things. Alan went through, and we've talked about this in one of the previous meetings, that now that faculty member certifies that the people on his or her project did the work. So here's the plus and here's the minus. Faculty member, I'll give you the minus first. Faculty member says, oh, I got to certify this too. Well, the plus on that is they ought to know who's working on their project. The other plus to it is you don't have to chase down all the other people. So people who have come and gone, individuals that know they're working in this area, but they don't know which grant is which, all that is taken care of now. We're making it easy peasy for the faculty member. And that faculty member absolutely should know who's working on their projects. Another reason this is coming up is I can tell you, we are under one particular audit. We have some going on right now, multiples, where we are pretty sure there's going to be a problem with effort in the fact that it's not certified timely. Where are we getting to this? I can tell you that it's been my experience at this is one of the most free cultural institutions about certifying effort. And I use that word instead of lackadaisical. It's important. It is, we have to get it done. And what you will notice is when we finally were trying to close up the ones that went through September of 2017,
17, not 18, 17. We had to strong arm people. We had to have the dean write people letters, okay? The responses for those, by the way, were just really interesting. Some people just said, yeah, you're right, okay? Other people said, I already did it. And we'd look in the system, yeah, they did it 4 hours earlier, okay? But anyway, so, that was the first step. The second step is we're going to be pushing now to get these up. We are going to get there, and I hope by the end of the calendar year, where you're actually having your faculty certify in the time period they're supposed to certify in. What impact does that have on you? PAAs. Remember, your cost transfers for salaries are only approved if they, with some exception, not many, are only approved if the effort hasn't been certified yet. So once we get timely in the effort certification, that means your PAAs have got to be pretty timely too, because that's the reason you're doing them. Somebody looks at their effort and said, no, this wasn't right. Sally, I told you I was working 30% in this, and then after when I saw it, I really only worked 20. That's cool. You can make that change. But then you got to have that PAA in time so they can certify the effort. So all this comes back to compliance, and then it comes back to reconciling your accounts. So you can see how all these start to fit together. We are in second step right now. We haven't pushed it since October of 18. The push is coming. And then pretty soon we're going to get into, this is your certification period, please certify.
Yeah, and part of it is we really are trying to reduce the amount of burden. So to Barbara's point about the numbers of individuals, I mean, we previously were asking about 3,000 individuals at the institution to certify. So that was, if you had a lab technician that got paid 10% on a grant 1 month, they would have to go in there and you had to explain to them that they had to certify their effort for the entire 6-month period because they got paid 10% on one grant 1 month. And they had to read this statement and understand what the impacts of that was and maybe chase them down. They might have left the institution. You might have had to set a proxy. It was a much more difficult process. That 3,000 numbers now about 1,000, and it's faculty members that tend to generally be more knowledgeable about the projects that they're working on. They at least should have some understanding of the work being performed and what salaries are being put onto their grants. So it does raise that level of understanding. The other thing of it is, it's not just the current audits that we have going on, but it's our annual audit, our annual A133. If something were to pop on there are numerous institutions across the country that have been fined for lack of controls in terms of effort reporting and salaries, and they number in the millions the dollars that are fined for the institution. So it's a severe punishment when they come in and find something for that. So we definitely want to make sure that we avoid those types of penalties, and we try and make sure that we are timely in our certifications. So again, here is the dates again, due April 19th. You will be getting lots of emails for it. If you have questions as far as training, in terms of how to do the certifications, we have the information up on our website. This PowerPoint, we will also be sharing this PowerPoint back out to through the listservs. We'll be sending this communication out so you can get these details, but you could feel free to reach out to us through our website. That goes over the hybrid model that I already discussed. And there's the email address that you can contact. It's ecrt.admin@miami.edu. That's a shared mailbox shared by a couple of individuals, but you would have often been contacted by Maria Wadsworth or Gloria Gary. Those are the two main contacts as it relates to effort certification. Any questions on effort? Okay. So I wanted to highlight, and this does speak to the Velos point that you brought up a moment ago. So the University of Miami has realized that its research technology or its technology support of research is for lack of a better word, in need of some help. So what we have done is the Office of Research Administration has partnered with Information Technology, and we brought in Huron Consulting Group. We have asked them to come in and conduct an assessment of where our research technology infrastructure currently sits. So what they are doing is it's a 6 to 8 week engagement. They're spending 3 weeks on site. This is actually the third week. They've been interviewing multiple individuals across the institution from all 3 campuses. It's been interviewing individuals from central offices, from compliance offices, from technology offices, as well as departmental folks, faculty, staff. It runs the gamut across the institution. Some of you here may have been interviewed, and the idea behind this is they are trying to understand what are the pain points as it relates to technology. What is it that we are doing from a technology perspective as it relates to research administration? And to borrow on one of the terms that they use, this is the little r, little a research administration. So this is not how Office of Research Administration does things. This is how we are utilizing, how we're supporting our research from an administrative standpoint. How are we doing our purchasing on grants? How are we doing our hiring on grants? How are we doing our COI, our IACUC, our IRB, our Office of Research Administration activities, all of it, the departmental support, everything. How does it all relate? And what are the systems and the personnel in place to support that from an IT perspective? So it is really focused on what is the IT and technological support there. And then the idea is that following this 6 to 8 week assessment, they are going to provide us with a strategic roadmap for technology on where we go next. Now, Huron Consulting Group has some software that's already in use at the University of Miami. And their commitment to us is that they are not coming in here and saying you need to buy more Huron software. They're not coming in here and telling us that we need to procure more services with them to fix all of our troubles. The idea is they're going to tell us you need to focus on this system first, then you need to focus on this other system, then this other system. So they are really giving us where it is that the university would get the biggest bang for our buck, where would we get the best return on investment, and which should be the strategy of where we should go. They're going to provide us with short, middle, and long-term solutions about where we should be looking at our technology, and they're going to provide us with the price points of where that should be. Because at the end of the day, all of this costs money. Anytime you procure systems, especially for an enterprise as large as we are, it's going to cost money. And so before we go back to the university and say, we need the money to do this, we have to know more or less how much that costs. So this is what the idea is. It doesn't mean that we're going to do it. It just means that we want to have a better understanding as a university of what it will cost to fix some of these technology challenges and which ones should we focus on first. Some of them may be already in the pipeline. Some of them may be already under development. Some of them we may not be aware of that are there as problems. So we just want to have a better understanding of what it is that we need to be focusing on and where should we be going. So this is something really to help that IT infrastructure. But as recipients of that, Office of Research Administration is heavily invested in that, and I think you all are too. So if they've reached out to you, if you're already participating in it, please share with them any information that you have, share with them your honest feedback. If you've already met with them and you do have some feedback that you forgot to share with them, some additional information that you think might be insightful, reach out to them. If you don't have their contact information, please let me know. I can get you in contact with them because the information that you have, that your faculty has, is valuable. We could not interview every single person that we thought would provide value because that would be impossible. There's way too many people. So we tried to take a cross-section of the university, tried to get a lot of different perspectives to be able to provide a valuable input for the project. Any questions on the technology assessment? So to the way that speaks to the Velos, one of the things they're going to look at is how does Velos currently sit in the technology infrastructure? How are we utilizing our current systems in relation to clinical trials, in relation to clinical trials management? What is the integrations between the various systems? What do we already have in place? And what changes do we need to make to any of those systems or to the business processes and how we use those systems so that we could better leverage them? Yes.
Is Workday one of the systems you're looking at as well?
Workday specific, so the question is Workday one of the systems they're looking at? Workday specifically, how we are interacting and using Workday specifically is not one of the systems they're looking at because the university has already a group that's looking at Workday specifically. What this team is looking at is more so the interactions between Workday and the other systems. So for example, what are the key components they're going to look at? Might be the integration from our pre-award system to Workday, or between our COI system and Workday. Because right now we're doing a lot of manual processes to move data in and out of Workday, which could likely be done through integrations. Yeah.
I heard through a grapevine that the university or the medical campus itself is looking at a different system rather than Workday, and the system is called Lost. How truthful is this rumor going on?
So the question is that the medical system is looking at another system for financials, and how truthful is that? I can tell you that I have sat with Mary Beth Briscoe as well as Brandon Gilliland, which are the two CFOs for University of Miami and for the health system, and both of them have said that Workday is our financial system. So I would be very surprised to hear that there's a major.
For the academic side.
Correct.
For the academy.
For the academy, yes. Which is really what the world of grants, that's where our focus has always been.
So I'm a little bit concerned because the rumors going around that it's the medical side and not just academic, but looking at how grants feed into this also. And if we're spending this money on this consulting group to look at systems that may affect Workday, how's that going to then later on, if it does take place?
I can tell you that grants are staying in the academy. So what happens with UHealth when they become a wholly owned subsidiary, and their applications going through right now for their own 501c3, so they can go, borrow money, But even as we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I was on a phone call with Ed Abraham and Jeff Dirk and Cindy Augustine about whether or not the health system will take grants. The answer was no. Okay? So what we're going to address, and I'm not trying to address UHealth, but what we're going to address is the grants aspect, what stays in the academy. Now, 3 years from now, somebody upends it and we got all new people. I can't tell you that. But I'm really hoping we got some people that stay in place for a while. So Workday will be our system of record. And Alan, before you came in, I talked about Sierra Cedar.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the consultants working on fixing the problems with Workday. Sorry.
Yep.
If I may say, I was in a meeting with, where Bristol was in the meeting, and what she's saying is sort of what we understood as well, that they're looking into different systems to see how they can be joined together. At least that's what I understood, or.
Well, that could be.
Yeah.
But if they look at the Lawson system or whatever they pick for UHealth, clearly there will have to be some kind of an interface of financials. Certainly that happens no matter what system you get. But let's look at it this way. That system isn't picked. We're talking about what systems integrate within the university right now. So I don't see it as an either or.
Yeah, and the focus, when I say the research focus, is really related to the grants focus. So with grants for the foreseeable future staying within the academy, that is a more defined scope. Is there another question? Okay. One exciting development that I think we're very, very pleased to share, and even though it is not something that we've even started negotiation on as far as final negotiations on cost, but we are going to be replacing the pre-award system. We have gotten the go-ahead and to begin that process. So we are going to be reaching out to the solution provider. More information on that will come. What I can tell you at this point is, as you see there in the middle, we are targeting fiscal year 20 for implementation of that pre-award system.
Not June.
June? Yeah, not June. That would be really fast. Cannot do that in that kind of time. This would mean that I can guarantee you the PCRFL would go away. We would be looking at electronic routing, electronic approvals. There would be lots of changes to our existing business processes. We would certainly have to do that. We would certainly have to better understand what it is we're doing today and what our industry best practices. There will be a lot of change. We would be engaging with a lot of the people in this room as well as faculty. The focus here would be on the faculty and us removing some of that administrative burden, allowing them access, transparency, allowing you the access and transparency to understand where your applications, where your contracts, where everything is in the pipeline, so that we can see things as they're being built. But please understand there will be a lot of change, and we will be looking to you for input throughout the process. But we will not be looking to make this system walk and talk the way we have always done business. Instead, we are probably going to be shifting our processes to align to more of what the system does. We're looking to get a system that does industry best practices. We're looking to leverage best practices and really understand how to be more efficient and streamlined. So that's going to be the focus.
Will they work also as part of that phase to look at, for example, the deadlines, internal deadlines as well, to incorporate that into the?
Absolutely. The systems that we've reviewed, it does have the incorporation of internal deadlines. It does have some support in terms of that functionality. Yes. So yeah. Absolutely. Interfacing with our post-award system with Workday would be without a doubt, it would be a key component of a new pre-award system. Currently, our pre-award system, InfoEd, sends all submitted applications and contracts, all of our pre-award, a basic shell into Workday, and it creates a proposal in Workday. We would look to, at a minimum, do that, but I can tell you we would look to do a lot more. So we would look to have a much, much more integrated system. This would be a minimum. And I really don't want to get into much details as to what it is that we anticipate being in that pre-award system. I have a wish list that is very, very long. I'm sure Jill has a wish list that's very, very long. And then we have to see where the financials are and how much all those wish lists would cost and what we can get the university to pay for. You know, we're shopping for a car right now, and we want to see what bells and whistles we can get on there. But I can tell you that we are going to be moving forward with a pretty nice change. As it relates to pre-award, we do have a couple of changes. Changes as it relates to the timing of things with you disclose and our conflict of interest process. So we've recently reached out to Dr. Lori Hayes in order to better understand what the process is and that integration between our current pre-award system, InfoEd, and how we are notifying their office when an award comes in. So up until now, what our current process has been, an application or a proposal goes in. Until that award comes in, until we have an executed contract in place, or until we have an actual notice of award, we do not, to use the former term, we do not click the button. We do not notify the you disclose system that that award has come in. What we are talking about doing is we are going to be doing that sooner in the process. The challenge that we've noticed is that if we are waiting until an award has come in, and specifically if it's a PHS or PHS-like award, we are holding the setup of that award, or we are holding the release of those funds. We are setting ourselves up in a challenging position. We are setting up our faculty in a challenging position. So we want to be more proactive about those notifications. So if we get some form of intent to fund from the agency, if we have some kind of an advance notification from the agency that we expect to receive funding, we will go ahead and insert in the pre-award system. This is something done by ORA. We will insert in the system a flag that will go ahead and create the triggering event in UDisclose. Creating of that triggering event in UDisclose will create that proposal record, and it'll notify the faculty member that they have to disclose for a project. If they have to disclose for a project, they will get notified. They will get an email telling them they have to disclose their team members and begin the process. So it's really just about moving that process sooner. You had a question? Yes, absolutely. Requests for just in time are going to be used as triggers for us to initiate this process.
And then two, when the email gets sent to the faculty member, can the department contact whoever who copied? Because a lot of times they.
So you know what, that's a great question. I actually don't know what the process is by Dr. Hayes' office in terms of what their communication process is, but we can certainly take that as a note, and we could reach back out to her and ask, one, do they have that that communication tree in place? Basically, do they know your faculty member and who they would need to contact for each faculty member? Because it may change over time, so we would want to know if they already have an established connection. And two, can the system be set up to flag additional people? So we could take that note.
That number, it's been sent out before, but no action was taken, and it wasn't until I asked them, I said, we already sent that like a month ago. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, as we get a little bit more reliant upon these systems, as we start realizing that these notifications are going out to the faculty member, and we absolutely want to make sure that we include the faculty members on these communications. We also have to be mindful of the fact that it's not always the faculty member that's going to take these actions. It might be yourselves as departmental admins that are going to be taking the actions. You may be having to do some additional legwork for the faculty member. You may be data entering the information for the faculty. You may be doing the work. You may be providing them some information, or you may be just be helping to remind them of some information. So we want to make sure that the proper communications go out, but that's something that we'll definitely refer back to Dr. Hayes and provide her some feedback. Yeah.
So ORA being proactive in notifying the office to start setting up this, and you just said that a just-in-time may be used as a trigger.
Will be used.
So will use or have been?
Will be used, yes.
Okay, so at that point, will it be the department notifying the compliance office, or will it be our contact at ORA in pre-award that's submitting the JIT, notifying them?
So once ORA receives that JIT, the just-in-time, we will flag the system to create the triggering event in UDisclose. So it's something that'll be transparent to you.
We're essentially going back in time. When we had the old conflict of interest system, we used to proactively trigger both just-in-times and contracts. When we got a contract in the door, we knew contracts were going to come to fruition, so we would start the process then. When Lori switched to the ePro system, she chose to switch to a model where we notified her when we received an award. We anticipated and have realized that that's causing a delay on our end. And as a result, we met with her, we discussed with her reinstituting both of these practices to add that proactivity in to allow processes to work in parallel. While the agency's reviewing your just-in-time documents and creating that award document, the PI and Lori's team can do their conflict of interest. And then as it relates to contracts, while my team is reviewing, negotiating, and executing that contract, the same process can be occurring. PI and Lori's group can be working on the COI review and approval. So we're going backwards in time in a very positive way.
With that commission of supplements, is that also an automatic triggering event or not?
So supplements, because they are a continuation of a project, they're not, they are not a brand new project. I don't believe in post-award, we're holding funds, release of funds based off of clearance on
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
not
these are the two areas that were delayed.
Yeah, a non-compete isn't gonna get a disclose button, just new
and competing.
and competing renewals. So the idea is, it doesn't make sense to us that you get an award and then we hit the button. The award's coming in right around the time it starts. Well, if the person hasn't disclosed yet or hasn't proactively disclosed, knowing they're gonna get an award, post-award, we're saying you can't put an expenditure on until they're all approved. So now we're going back to the way we used to do it. And I will tell you, we think that's a better thing. We are the ones that suggested it to Lori. But here's the downside. So let's say we get a contract that takes 3 months to negotiate. Okay? When we get that contract, we're going to be pushing the you disclose button. The you disclose is going to go out to the investigator. Until that investigator does that disclosure, you disclose is going to ping them.
Remind them.
Yeah. So they're not going to forget. They're going to get automatic emails. And frankly, 99% of our contracts come to fruition. It is, again, what we're looking for is being proactive, stopping the last minute stuff, getting things in gear. So when you do have a contract that's a month away or 2 months away, go ahead and disclose.
Right.
You know whether you've got something or not.
And a few of you keep using the term just in time. We purposely didn't utilize that here on the slide. And the reason for that is NIH refers to it as just in time, but there are other agencies that come to us on a regular basis and say, we're about to fund, but in order to do so, we need these documents. So that's why we put up here intent to fund. We don't care what the agency's specific terminology is.
Any questions on the process change? Again, this should, for the most part, be transparent to you and the departments. The only change really is it'll notify you sooner, it'll notify your faculty members sooner, that is. And so they might be pinged multiple times if they're not coming through and filling in the team members and doing the disclosures timely. But hopefully this will aid in that setup. So when it does come time to set up the award and post-award, we can set it up right away and the faculty member can go ahead and begin spending on the project.
I have a question. The
Yeah.
intent to fund, that can be in the form of an email, or does it have to be a signed document by the institution? I'm saying, for example, subcontract from another university.
It varies by entity. So some agencies want it in the form of a letter. Some agencies want you to go into a system and submit documents. But if you're referring specifically to my signature, most entities nowadays are allowing me to sign electronically. And even if they want a letter, we sign that letter electronically, and then we either submit it through email or we submit it through their system.
So I guess what I was trying to say is, if we get an email from another university for a subcontract saying this award is coming, we need to revise the budget or statement of work before we set up the contract, can that email be used to trigger an event in the disclosure system?
So I think we're still working on what the actual process is going to be. Belinda asked before if pre-award is going to do that. The idea is, I think, and Alan, please interrupt me if I say this wrong, the majority of communications like that come through our MRA or our CRIS mailbox, which Alan's team manages. So if it is clear that it's just in time, the trigger could happen at that point. Could happen. We still need to finalize that process.
Yeah, because what we don't want to do is, let's say that that other entity tells you they anticipate them getting their award, but that doesn't dictate the timeline by which you'll get your award. your subcontract to be issued, and then the negotiation begins where we have to accept that outbound subcontract. So we don't want to trigger at a point where it's way too early in the process. So there's going to be a little bit of a conversation between possibly you and the pre-award office, or maybe that contract officer. It might involve a little bit of a conversation before we go ahead and notify.
Okay, so I want to stop here for a second. There is nothing wrong when you know you have a subcontract that started in August and we haven't gotten the award yet. When you know you're getting a subcontract, the problem is we have to have some kind of notification for Lori's team to have it put in there. So the minute something goes on, if you're a faculty member and it's a new subcontract, it's not the next year. If you want to start that spending, your faculty member needs to be proactive, and we can help as well, but to get that institution to give us something so they can go in and disclose. You don't necessarily have to wait for us to ping, to hit a button for Lori to ping me.
In that
And I would
case,
say, in your example, if you have the email from the agency, they're requesting documents in order to execute that agreement, we should be flagging Lori's group right then and there so that Lori can start working on it. To me, there's no too soon. I'd rather do it soon than do it afterwards.
and I would even take another step if it is something that, for example, here we are sitting today, and that anticipated start date for your subcontract is going to be backdated to March 1st, whenever it does get executed, and we can set it up as an advance award. You could use that documentation to do it. So in an advance award, let's say that subcontract does not come to fruition and you do have to transfer your charges out to a departmental program. That's okay. If that subaward does come to fruition, but you have been placing them on a departmental fund, on a program, and we didn't get the COI cleared until much later because we never notified, we can't transfer the charges in most cases back. So it's better to be proactive there whenever possible. But again, reach out to your pre-award counterpart and ensure you engage them as early in the process as possible. That's kind of the key there. Dr. Hayes has provided us with the dates of the webinars that they have coming up. You're encouraged to attend these if you have not recently. It's going to give you all the information necessary to understand what the process is. You're going to ask questions and be aware of whatever the timing is of what their process. That might be a great opportunity to bring up the communications and how those are going through in the system. And also they have these instructor-led courses, and I believe a lot of these are actually with Lori herself. And so these are an excellent opportunity to get there and receive that firsthand knowledge of what the process is, how the system works, how things move through the system, what they're looking for, things like that. So definitely try and attend one of these sessions if at all possible. Very informative. Any questions on the changes with UDisclose and the COI process? I think the last thing we have is the contact information for Dr. Hayes.
Okay, it is my pleasure. We have a guest speaker today. Cynthia Gates is here. She's the new executive director for the HSRO. I just met her myself about 10 minutes ago. How long have you been here? 7 weeks. Ah, welcome. She's going to talk about the common rule.
I know everyone is tired. If you need to stand up a minute and wake up, please do so. Stretch. You can stand up, stand on by the wall over there if you need to. It's been a long time here, and this is important information too. And so I hope y'all will be able to listen. I know your brain's probably already full. So we're going to talk about this new common rule. What is the common rule? It's something that's common and it's a rule, right? No, this is the rule that we follow for federally funded research. We're required to follow it. We've said we will follow it. We'll be audited if we don't follow it. So it's been revised, and it's been revised kind of significantly. And some of these changes will affect you, and that's the only thing I'm going to put up here is what's really going to affect you and the researchers and things you ought to know. So here's the topics I'm going to cover. And I just covered the applicability, but here's the list of agencies that have adopted the rule. And if you'll notice, you probably won't notice, but the Department of Justice is not on there. So if you just happen to get funding from the Department of Justice, they're on the old common rule, just to confuse us, okay? Also, the Congress and the American Cares Act has required the FDA to harmonize their regulations with the common rule. And so that means the FDA is going to be coming out with new revisions to their regulations. They came out with one recently that is a really good thing. And does anyone know what that is? Come on, someone know? We're allowed to waive consent for minimal risk research that's under FDA regulations. And so if it's minimal risk, it used to be if you had to look at 5,000 X-ray images, you had to get 5,000 consents, even if they were retrospective, if the research was subject to FDA, if you were going to submit the data to FDA. Now the FDA will allow the IRB to waive consent if it's minimal risk, doesn't adversely affect the rights of the subjects, and you really couldn't do the research if you have to get consent. So that's just a little extra that I'm putting into here. But be ready for more FDA changes and assume the FDA is going to make similar changes to the common rule wherever they can. So we got some new definitions, and they stuck this definition of clinical trial in here, which is not listed pretty much anywhere else in the regulation, but they wanted us to be very aware that all the agencies now are endorsing or accepting that NIH definition of clinical trial. And so if you're conducting a clinical trial supported by the NIH, it's a big deal because you have to do 2 extra things. It's a bonus point if anyone can tell me what those are. Are y'all still asleep or? Can you name one of them? One of them? You got to post on clinicaltrials.gov. If it's a clinical trial that's funded by NIH, you've got to do that. If you don't do it, it's not that we'll get fined so much, it's that your peers won't be able to get funding, period. And so people won't like you. Yes. That's already happening. I'm just making sure you guys know it. And now the other agencies are endorsing it, and so I don't know what they're going to do. Okay? What's the other requirement if it's a clinical trial? GCP training. Very good. You get a bonus. But if you understand the definition, you get a big star because there's like 3 pages of FAQs on the definition on the NIH website. But here's the analysis. Does it involve human subjects? Are they prospectively assigned to an intervention? They say 1 or more in the definition, just an intervention. Are you assigning people to do something or get something? Is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants? And is the effect being evaluated health related or behavioral, a behavioral type outcome? If it meets that definition, then you got to do 2 things. GCP training, post on clinicaltrials.gov. You only have to post if you're the sponsor. So they changed the definition of human subject, and really it was just to clarify that a biospecimen or like a tube of blood or something like that, those are human subjects if they are identifiable. So once you have that specimen of whatever it is, if it's got an identifier on it, a direct identifier, then it's a human subject. But of course, if it's coded and a link to the identifier is kept somewhere else, it's not a human subject. So that's the best way to do it. If you have an intervention to draw that blood or get that specimen, then it's human subject research. But if you're just getting specimens that are already drawn and they're coded and linked to the person's identity, then it's not human subject research. And if it's not human subject research, you don't have to submit to the IRB and you don't have to get informed consent. They also gave us some clarification on the definition of research. And it's the same old definition. It's a systematic investigation designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. But these things are not research. And one of those things is really nice to know is scholarly and journalistic activities. So that's case studies, that's oral histories, things like that are not human subject research. If you're making an inference from it, if you're analyzing the data you have that you gathered from the case history or from the oral history, and you're making assumptions from it, then that changes it. But if you're just reporting something and you're not saying, because this happened, this might happen in similar situations, then it's not human subject research. Yes? It really doesn't depend on the number of cases you're reporting, unless you're reporting these cases to show that because this happened in these cases, this will probably happen otherwise in other cases. Does that make sense? You're not making an assumption out of all of that. So you're not really investigating, you're just reporting. There's a difference. And so public surveillance activities, I once had a IRB submission where they were going to draw blood from everyone who worked in the ER on a certain day because a patient came in who had this really serious infection, and they were doing a surveillance. And it was, gosh, it was supported by the CDC. And after I looked into it, it wasn't a research study, it was a surveillance activity. So if you get something like that, you don't have to get IRB review. Also, if it's a criminal justice investigation or Homeland Security thing, you don't have to get IRB review. I've never seen one of those before. So we have some new exemptions and some revisions to exemptions. And so this is good news. Listen, listen, listen. Exemption number 1 really hasn't changed, and I don't know if we do very much of this type of research. It's educational research to see better ways to educate people. And now it's a little bit more difficult to get because you have to state that it's not likely to adversely impact the student's opportunity to learn or the assessment of the educators. And so I haven't seen any of that here, but if you happen to see something where you're assessing a way to educate people, you have to show that it won't likely impact those two things. Exemption number 2. It used to be with exemption number 2, if you're interviewing people or doing a survey type research or something like that, you either made it de-identified or you collected data that wouldn't put the subject at risk. And if it put the subject at risk, you had to de-identify it to make it exempt. And so now, though, you don't have to do that. There's this provision for this limited IRB review. And so you can submit survey research or interview focus group, and if the data you're collecting will place people at risk, you can still collect identifiers, and we would do a limited review. Our threshold, though, will be that when you collect the identifiers, you use a code or something like that, and it's linked to the individual's identifier. It has to be done that way to meet the exemption. Otherwise, we're going to send it up to IRB review, an expedited level, most likely. Any questions about that? And this talks, are they going to get these slides?
Yes.
Okay, so the IRB's threshold for recording any data now is going to be where you record the data in one place with a code, and you keep a link to the person's identity in a separate area. And both of those data sets need to be on an encrypted device or approved cloud thing. So that's our threshold. And then you have to justify then why you can't de-identify the data and keep it in a coded manner like that. There's this new thing called security risk assessment that you might have to do. It's coming out on our smart forms. I think it's ready today. And some people saw it a little bit earlier this week. It wasn't working right. Now it is working right, it looks like. And you want to avoid this data assessment because it's going to delay approval. And so the best thing to remember is always use an approved device or cloud-based storage, and separate your data so that it's not identifiable. It can be coded and linked, but not directly identifiable. Exemption number 3, this is entirely new, and this is where you can even randomize subjects to two different interventions. Of course, the interventions, though, have to be brief, harmless, painless, not physically invasive or embarrassing. So a lot of clinical things might not work for this, but there could be some. There is this exemption available, and it's completely exempt from the requirement for IRB review but you have to get an exemption determination. But if you're not recording identifiers, then it's exempt. If you're recording identifiers, and if any of the data collected could place the subject at risk, then it's still exempt, but it's that limited IRB review. And I told you the threshold on how to store the data. Keep it coded and put it on a secure approved website or database. If you can't involve children in this one, and you can't involve deception in this one. And so when I say put people at risk, I just think about if you read about it in the Miami Herald, or if their coworker learns about it, something like that. That's the test, okay? Exemption number 4 really hasn't changed, and that's the one that you would do the most of, is the retrospective record reviews. It hasn't changed, except that the data doesn't have to be existing. It can still be exempt if the data are existing. It used to be aren't existing. It used to be all the data had to be existing. The problem is that the regulators haven't thought about the fact that if you're going to go into the medical record, we're going to have to do an expedited review, because you probably don't want to get authorization from the subject. If it's prospective, you have to show why you can't get authorization from the subject. So and there's several ways that you can do this, and this is consent and authorization, getting this consent and authorization. And one is, for some studies, the numbers may be so large, and that if you can't get consent from people, that might bias the data. And so it would make the data invalid from a scientific perspective. And so if you have all the people who might not give consent, or you might not be able to get consent from for some reason, might have some variable in common that could cause something to skew the data. That's one way, if you can assert that. And if you Google NIH waiver of consent bias, you'll read a manuscript on that if this is of interest to you. Okay. The other way is if you just can't find the subjects, of course. But if they're coming into the office, you can't get around that. So if it's prospective, it's exempt now, but we still have to do the waiver of authorization. If it's not medical data, then we could probably get around something. And if the data are publicly available, it's still the same. It doesn't have to be existing, and it's exempt. If you're getting publicly available data, it's exempt from the requirement for IRB review. Exemption number 4 has more sections to it. And when you read that, if you tell me what it means, and I'm a lawyer, and if you can tell me what it means, then maybe we'll use it. But right now, we're not going to use this. One of them is the privacy rule. If the entity is subject to the privacy rule, but we still have to do that waiver of authorization. So might as well do it expedited level. And this other one is all these different privacy acts. How do you know if the data you're collecting is subject to one of these privacy acts? And I read some of the acts and like their pages. And so it's too much risk for us to adopt these. And I don't see a need for it either. Now, hold the why in a minute. Exemption number 5, sometimes we can get a grant to evaluate some service, the public benefit program. And if you get that kind of grant and you're going to evaluate it and it's considered research, they have to post that research on the federal website. And so we will help you with that and we'll know if you can go ahead and submit it if you want, and we'll check the websites for you because it's different websites. And then exemption number 6, I just was reminding you that it's here, taste and food quality, like the Pepsi challenge. At UC Davis, where I come from, we did a lot of this. We were a Department of Agriculture university, and we also did a lot of wine and beer production. And so people really wanted to be on the wine and beer studies for some reason, you know? Not so much the food studies, but I don't understand. So in the common rule, the 2018 common rule, that's what we call it, the 2018 common rule, there's provisions for this broad consent. And that's supposed to allow researchers to use identifiable data, just use it for any type of research if someone gives a broad consent. And it's just too hard to track this broad consent. I don't know of any institution that's adopting it. And I don't know if you've talked to your colleagues about it, if anyone knows of an institution that's adopting it, but I don't know. The risk is just too great. And so there's 2 exemptions that go with it. We're not adopting the exemptions. So here's the good news. Continuing review for minimal risk studies is no longer required. Now the problem is it's still required for FDA research. So our first question is it's subject to FDA. If it's subject to FDA regulation, then we're going to do continuing review. And then we kind of go down the list. The new common rule, if it's compliant with the requirements of the new common rule, then we're going to say no more continuing review if it's minimal risk. We'll try to get it to become compliant with the common rule to stop the continuing review. If the study is permanently closed to enrollment and it qualifies for an exemption, we'll go ahead and no longer do continuing review. So you might get messages from us, do you really want to keep doing this continuing review step? And if you don't, here's what you need to do. Or sometimes we might just automatically say it no longer requires continuing review. If we do continuing review on a study that doesn't require it, we have to explain why. And so we want to not do continuing review if possible. That's a lot less work for you, less work for us. Any questions about that? Y'all can just read that one. Informed consent. Now this is the biggie. One thing, we're not adopting broad consent. I told you that a minute ago. But there's these new requirements for informed consent. So anything that you submit today or in the future, and you have a consent form and it's federally funded, except for DOJ, your consent, you need to use the template in the ePro system for common rule. And you look at it, it's really different. It starts off with key elements at the beginning. And we looked at other institutions and came up with what they were using the most, and that's the key elements that we put in there. The consent form as a whole has to tell the subject why they might want to be in the research and also why they might not want to be in the research. So I'm recommending you put a statement in there. You might not want to be in this research if. Something to remember. This is a waiver of consent. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. I'll go back to that. The consent form has to be at a reasonable person standard. So you think about a reasonable person, and if they would understand the way the consent form is formatted, the way it's worded, it has to facilitate understanding. And so our template, we're hoping will facilitate understanding. It's always a draft though. If you want to recommend a change to our template, please do so. We're looking for any way we can to improve it. So any questions about the new consent?
I have a question. So what does the IRB do? I've read a little bit on this, I don't know much. But one of the unintended consequences when you're looking at biospecimens or tissues that can be used, down the line in cell lines. And what happens, because I think there's a talk or fear that, at some point people could come back and say, I take away my consent and the cell line's already manufactured, distributed, and being used.
Under the new common rule, I just went 2 slides forward, you have to tell people if you're going to do whole genome sequencing and tell them a little bit about what that means. And so our template has that language.
Could not, however, if you're not going to do that right now, theoretically, the tissue could be genetically sequenced
And
in the
so
future.
my recommendation is to stick it in every document where you're going to be banking some tissue. Okay? You also have to a statement whether or not you're going to give clinically relevant results to subjects. And so you have to be very careful there because if it's laboratory results, it has to be from a CLIA certified lab to give the results to subjects. Okay? And so you don't give them the results if it's not. You need to tell them if there's going to be any commercial products made from there. Remember Loretta Lacks? I don't know if y'all have read the Loretta Lacks book, but you need to tell them if you're going to make commercial products out of their blood or specimens. You got to tell them if they're going to if you're going to reuse your specimens for future research. Let me see. Y'all can read all this. I don't want to keep you. Oh, but here's a biggie. If you're the sponsor, you've got to post your consent document on a federal website within 60 days of the last study visit by any subject. And so, or as required by the protocol. So when you're getting your funding, this is for federally funded, you have to find out what website to post it on. There's a few of them and I haven't listed them here, but you should get that information. You have to post the consent form on a federal website. This is just not much. We don't have to waive consent if you're going to do a record review to identify subjects, or if you're going to screen subjects some way where there's no procedures. We don't have to get consent anymore. If there's a reason you can't get a signature on the consent form because of a norm of a cultural group, we can waive consent now for that. One more thing, waivers of consent. That's where I was before. Now you have to justify using identifiable information or biospecimens for the research. You have to, it's best to find a way to use anonymous or coded and de-identified specimens or information. If you use coded, anonymous specimens or information, do you have to submit this for IRB review? No, it's not considered human research. So if you have the code here and it's linked to the data here and they're kept in two separate places, then you don't have to submit for human subject research. Only little bit tidbit is some of those agencies say if the investigator was the original person who obtained the specimens, it's still identifiable. So that's when the agency is going to make you get the IRB review for it. You might want to ask them about it. Does anyone have any questions? I kind of rushed through a great big law, but yes.
Not so much a question, but maybe a comment, and you can speak to the group about it. We just recently ran into a situation where a department looked at the informed consent template and assumed that it was engraved in stone. And
Oh, no.
because they wanted to, or the sponsor wanted to vary from that template, the department went straight to general counsel and thought that that was the appropriate path.
No.
And so we reached out to HSRO, and HSRO explained, it's a template, it's a guide to work from.
Right.
But if the sponsor mandates something else, all they need to do is work with you and your team to assess
Thank you.
whether the change is warranted.
Yeah, don't go bug general counsel. We're reasonable people in the IRB, believe it or not. And so if you don't like our template or the sponsor doesn't like our template, now it has to be industry sponsored, you know, or that's kind of the ones who won't usually like our template. We'll work with them. Likewise, the way our protocol is written, if something's not appropriate in there, those are suggested guidelines, suggested templates. We'll work with you. Yes.
My understanding is that there are new ICF forms without the expiration date.
Oh, yeah.
So do we have to reconsent everybody on the new forms?
No. So one of my goals is to use a lean concept with a review of human subject research and only do things that add value. That expiration date on the consent form did not add value. There was no reason to reconsent people or to keep new forms and things like, if there's no changes, there's no reason for a new form. And so we removed the expiration dates. You do not have to reconsent, just new subjects that come in have to use that one without the expiration date that you have. Any other questions?
Got one more back there.
Yes.
City program recently sent administrators just the notification of the common rule revisions, but they didn't specify in that email, just letting them know. How is this being communicated to the investigators here at UM from the standpoint of the IRB?
Well, we've given out listserv messages. I gave a talk with the, I have a mental blank. I've given one talk to research coordinators already about this. It was fairly well attended. And then as submissions come in, we're telling them. I mean, it's not really affecting, it's mainly affecting new submissions. And so that's the ones. And so that's why I'm here telling you guys, so you can also help spread the word. Because I can send all the listservs, but I can't make people read them for some reason.
We know that. We have that same problem.
Yeah. Did that address it? I'm doing the best I can with that.
Is city rec program being revised, like for those revisions, like do they need to retrain the city rec program?
We're not requiring retraining at this point, but the city program has been revised. And so now if you take it, it will be, they'll have the new common rule stuff in it. Okay, that's been ready for a year.
Okay, Cynthia, thank you very,
You're
very much.
welcome.
And thank you for staying the whole time.
Yes,
Really
thank you.
A lot of information.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.